Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 247 with Tracey Bailey. Some of my favorite parts of this episode were when Tracey talks about greenwashing and why we need to know about it and what we can do about it. I also loved it when she shares the number one best way to live toxic-free and why we need to reduce plastic, and especially the nasty type you want to avoid at all costs. And I love her simple steps to going plastic-free. Her ideas are genius. But there is so much more wisdom and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So, to listen to the full podcast and get all the info in the show notes, head on over to melissaambrosini.com/247 right now. Tracey, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here. Tell us about your story. Tell us about how you got to where you are today, how you started your company. Tell us how that all began for you.
Well, I started Biome 15 years ago, but the genesis for it was probably 20 or so years ago. After university, I started working in a career in public relations. I had done a Bachelor of Business Communication at university, and my career in PR had led me to work in Indonesia, and I worked there for 4 years for some of the biggest companies in the world that had operations in Indonesia. And during that time, my passion for the environment and sustainability was growing, I guess, inside of me. And working with those companies, particularly from a PR point of view, I was really on the side of trying to make them look better, not necessarily to fully greenwash, but to smooth over the edges, I guess, of some of the things that were happening with their practices. And that's where I became more concerned about. I really wanted to be working on the side, I guess, of being able to change the practices and really make a difference to the solutions to the world's environmental problems. And while I was in Indonesia, I took an amazing trip to the jungles of Kalimantan, one of the biggest islands in Indonesia, to see the orangutans. And I actually went on that trip with my parents, which was a very special thing because growing up, our family had been always fascinated with primates and with the natural wonders of the world. We lived in a small mining town in central Queensland, and that was the days when there was really, we had one black and white television station, no media. Our whole access to the world was through World Book Encyclopedia. We had the big A to Z compilation on the shelf.
Yep, I had those too.
And also a subscription to National Geographic. And every time that National Geographic magazine arrived, we would just pore over the stories of the natural wonders and animals of the world. So to be then, as an adult, going to this remote wilderness jungle of Kalimantan with my parents was so special. And going there and seeing the orangutans, but not only seeing them, but seeing the decimation that was happening to their habitat all around this last vestige of rainforest that they had to live in. That's when I really decided that I was going to make a change in my life and do something to help these precious animals. And it sounds a little bit corny, but I looked into the eyes of an orangutan, which actually is like looking into the eyes of a human. You can see straight into their soul. And I looked into the eyes of this orangutan and just made a silent promise that I will devote my career to doing something to help save what is happening to you in your jungle home. And that really was the genesis of Biome. It did take me quite a few years after that to wrap up my career in Indonesia, come home to Australia, have 2 children. And then when my youngest was about 3 months old, I decided this is an awesome time to start a new business. So that is when I decided I believe that if I start a retail business that makes it easy for people to make more conscious choices that have been well researched and that they can have peace of mind that they're buying products that have been environmentally and socially responsibly made, that they will buy those products. And that came to be true. 15 years later, Biome is a thriving, wonderful business with purpose, with now 5 physical retail stores in Brisbane and the Gold Coast, and our online store, which looks after customers all over Australia and the world.
Beautiful. For someone who hasn't heard of the term greenwashing, can you tell us what greenwashing is and how can we look out for it?
Okay, well, greenwashing is when a company tries to convey a false impression that a product is actually more environmentally responsible than what it is. And the reason they do this, of course, is that they're trying to catch on to the growing consumer demand for living more consciously and sustainably, but they're doing it for the reason of creating profit rather than the true purpose behind the product.
So let's talk about sustainable living and what we can do to live a more sustainable and ethical and toxic-free life. How can we do it? What are some basic tips, as many as you can give us? Like, what are some things that we can start to implement into our life?
Okay, well, one of the wonderful things about living a more toxic-free life is that it's not only healthier for you, but it's healthier for the planet as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And we really, I think the big number one win is to eliminate synthetic fragrances. Synthetic fragrances cause a lot of health impacts for people, particularly to breathing issues, headaches. You might yourself have experienced if you walk into a store that has really strong synthetic fragrance, you feel quite overwhelmed. You might even develop a headache and have some issues with breathing because there are, under the one ingredient that can be listed on the back of the product, it might just say parfum or fragrance, and that's all the manufacturer needs to put as the ingredient. But actually, there are many hundreds or thousands of different chemicals that can hide behind that one word. These are very toxic for us to breathe in. So synthetic fragrances can be found in all of your skincare and body care that you're, rubbing onto your skin, that you're washing through your hair. They can also be found in things like scented candles. So I would definitely recommend avoiding all scented candles and just using beautiful, pure beeswax candles.
Or essential oils.
Yes, that's right. Essential oils are a great natural alternative. And that's where they're great to use instead of air fresheners. So any of those synthetic air fresheners that squirt things into the air of your home, really all they're doing is masking the smell. They're not actually getting rid of the smell. And of course, introducing all these quite harmful chemicals into the air that you breathe.
What are some other things that we can do to go as toxic free and zero waste as we possibly can? Like, how else can we live a more sustainable and ethical life?
Trying to eliminate plastics from your home and your life is another important area to focus on. And I'm not suggesting that you should just get rid of all the plastics in your home because there's already a lot of resources and fossil fuels have been dug up out of the ground to make those plastics. And we don't just want to dump them into landfill because, as you know, every plastic ever made still exists. It never actually breaks down, or it will perhaps in, 500 or 1,000 years. So we still want to get some usability out of those plastics that you might already have, but it's important just to use them in appropriate ways. So definitely not using them for heating anything or putting hot foods into, because the heat can increase the chances that the plastic will release chemicals. So you can use them for some storage in your home. Probably dry goods is the best thing to use them for. or use them for other kinds of storage, like storing your bits and pieces in your garage or your office and so on. But the key then is to look at not bringing any more plastics into your home and looking for alternatives such as stainless steel and glass and wood that can be used instead of plastic.
Yeah.
And there are a few plastics that are much worse than others, and one of those is PVC. And the issues surrounding PVC haven't really become that well known in Australia as yet. But in other countries in the world, as is often the case, there are a lot more restrictions on PVC than there are here in Australia. So that's a number 3 plastic. When you look at a plastic, hopefully it has one of those numbers inside, some chasing arrows that give you an idea about what the plastic is. I always like to remember this little slogan, PVC number 3 is not for me. And then there are other plastics which more people have heard about that contain BPA.
Where do you usually find that PVC3? Where's that usually found?
Alarmingly, it's in children's lunchboxes, the soft, insulated lunchboxes. You know, they often have that sort of grey, shiny, plasticky lining inside of them. That is usually, that is usually PVC. So,
oh gosh.
Yes, and it's also used a lot in construction. Of course, you hear about the old PVC pipes, often that our water supply and so on is run through. It's in inflatable toys, again, things that children are using because the plasticizers are used to make that plastic really pliable. So, those inflatable pool toys are often PVC.
So what is this PVC doing? What effect is that having on our health?
The PVC releases, it contains phthalates and it releases those chemicals into the air. It's not only toxic in the way that you use it, but it's also toxic when it's being produced. So it's very harmful to the workers and the communities living around factories where it's being made. It's harmful in its use as it can off-gas these toxins, and then also in its disposal when it's often it's in landfill, it's burnt at the end of its life and it releases even more gases. So, and they are endocrine disruptors that all contribute to this myriad of things that are going wrong with our health. And I'm not an expert in that area, but there is obviously you can read a lot about that on the net, and also their greenhouse gases. So it's all contributing to global warming and the state of the environment on our planet.
What else can we do besides removing the plastics? And looking out for these synthetic fragrances? What else can we do?
In terms of living a more sustainable life and helping to live in a way that is part of the solution to our world's environmental challenges, I would really like to encourage people to look at reducing their food waste and composting. Food waste is actually one of the greatest possibilities that we have as individuals to make a significant impact on reducing global warming. We often hear about avoiding meat or eating less meat as a way of producing less greenhouse gases and helping with global warming. But what people may not realize is that what is actually ending up in food waste and heading off to landfill actually accounts for 10 times the amount of carbon emissions that went into producing the food that is on your plate. Food waste or reducing food waste is one of the areas where we have the greatest possibility as an individual to make a significant impact. And when we talk about food waste, it's basically the food that we throw out, the leftovers that we don't use, or the produce that spoils before we have a chance to use it. And there's an incredible amount of resources, of our world's finite resources, that go into producing all of that food, commencing with how the food is grown, produced, packaged, transported. You go to the supermarket to pick it up, you bring it home, you store it in a fridge. every step along that way produces a significant amount of greenhouse gases. So if we can reduce the amount of food globally, individually, of course, as well, but on a global scale, we can have a massive difference on what is happening with global warming.
But what else can we be doing? What other tips do you have for us?
Well, just as the final step in that, the issue of food waste, and as you mentioned there, Melissa, sometimes you do end up with some food that can't be eaten or turned into a stock for soup, but it's really important if you can try to compost that food waste at home, because once the food scraps go off to landfill, as they decompose in landfill, they produce methane, which is a far more harmful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So if we can reduce the amount of anything really going to landfill and instead dealing with it at home in a closed loop system in our own garden where we're benefiting from all of those beautiful nutrients, we again will make a really great impact to helping to reduce global warming. So that and it's super simple to do. It's one of those things that's always seems hard until you actually do it. I would strongly recommend a worm farm. I love my worms. They are living creatures, so you do have to take care of them. And it's quite a joke among family and friends whenever I need to find somebody to house sit. They not only have to look after my dog, but also look after my worms. But they really are very easy to look after and to deal with all of your waste at home.
What if you don't have a garden and you live in a high-rise apartment and there's no balcony? What can we do then?
We can reach out then to our local council or to other groups in the community. It is very exciting to see that finally, in the last few years, our local councils are getting a lot more proactive with this. There are some towns in Australia and around the world that actually do have green waste systems that you can put your organic scraps into. But for those that don't, I know where I live in Brisbane, we have local community composting hubs. And then there's another amazing resource. It's a website called sharewaste.org. And can you believe you can actually go on there and find somebody to take your scraps? It's like a Tinder for composting.
Oh, wow. And we'll link to that in the show notes. But for someone who may want to start composting, do they have to get a worm farm, or can they, what can they do? How do they do it?
Another great solution is a bokashi system. And this is like it works in a sense because it's a bin that you can keep in your kitchen. And you put all of your scraps into there, not just fruit and vegetables, but meat, dairy, any food waste. And it uses an effective microorganism, a type of bacteria that basically ferments your scraps. And then at the end, though, once your bin is full and those scraps have been fermenting for a little while, you do need to find somewhere to bury those scraps. So if you don't have a garden, again, you would need to link up with a local composting group or a community farm, somebody that can take those scraps and dig them into the soil and where they turn into a compost.
Right. Okay. So what else can we be doing? What other tips have you got for us?
There's lots of advice, as you know, and about practical tips for how you can live more sustainably, how you can use less plastic, go zero waste. We know there's lots of practical resources to be found on the web for that. But I think for me, the missing link in all of what's going on is our connection with nature. I really believe that a big part of why the planet is in so much trouble at the moment is because we have lost our connection with nature. And, we're spending less time outdoors. We're spending less time with our hands in the soil, growing our own food, less time getting out into true wilderness and just sitting still and listening and looking at what is happening around us in nature. And we forget that humans are nature. We're just one species of millions on the planet, and we don't have any greater rights than any other species to exist. And we breathe in air that brings life to our bodies, and we breathe out. And that same air is being breathed in by all the other creatures and plants on our planet. So we truly are really one with nature.